Hi, this is Cleo. I'm going to walk you through a deck that we used with Novartis about a year ago, last August. So this is our safe harbor slide in our CTMS deck. It's always nice to have an agenda to lay out where you're going with the presentation. One of the things that we did is we included a lot of Novartis's requirements. So this is a little bit about the problem statement. Here's what you're looking for, Novartis. It's always nice if you can have that feedback from the customer and then read back some of their challenges that are going to be addressed during the course of the presentation. Barring that, it's nice to bring in a deck, or bring in a slide, I should say, that talks about the problem statement. Here's why people are using a CTMS. Here's some of the challenges that we're going to address. Now we go into the process of outlining the CTMS application. You see that the sub-bullet there is CTMS, providing the context in a clinical trial. When we talk about CTMS, there are a lot of processes that are either enabled directly or facilitated through the use of the CTMS. And we're looking at this, we're talking about this, looking up in the value chain area up top here, from the planning and setting up of the trial, through the conduct of the trial, and through the collation of the results and completion of the study. Down below, you'll get a picture of some of the processes that are facilitated and sometimes provided directly through the CTMS. We won't go through each of these particular boxes or items, but just to give you a quick idea. As an example, let's talk about recruiting of investigators. When we talk about CTMS and some of the value that it can provide, you think about the fact that you've had experience with investigators for a considerable amount of time. You've worked with investigators over multiple studies over multiple years. Wouldn't it be great to be able to go back, mine that information so that you can, for example, look an assessment of a given investigator over time to find out how that investigator has worked with your organization through the course of various studies? So that as you're making your decisions of who you're going to work with, you're doing this not based upon a general feeling, but based upon some metrics, based upon information that you've gathered over time, and you can go back and look at that information. From there, you can help determine your pool of investigators you're going to reach out to, and CTMS application can help you reach out to them. Send them an email, send them a Word document, send them a paper mail to say, hey, why don't you come and participate on our given trial. So that's one example of how we can leverage the application around recruiting investigators. Another area that we tend to focus on is initiating site activities. It's one thing when you have your top CRAs who know what they're doing all of the time and they know exactly what your processes are. But often you have, organizations have decent turnover with CRAs. Or you've got some CRAs who are very efficient and others who may not be as efficient in certain types of processes. What we're able to do is help you take your best practices and embed them into the application so that you have a template of activities that are focused around initiating site activities. As a matter of fact, this idea of the template or activity templates is leveraged throughout the application. So when we talk about you initiating site activities, there's also going to be doing something similar as we're going out to do site visits, as an example. We're leveraging templates, we're leveraging best practices, we're embedding your processes inside of the application for use across the board so that you are gaining some level of efficiency, gaining additional consistency across your organization. Other areas that we tend to focus on from an enablement perspective with CTMS, we look down at enrolling subjects and patients. Now, if we're talking about a larger study, more than likely we're going to integrate with an EDC or an IVRS as an example. But if it's a small study, you may be enrolling individual patients into the CTMS. So you're able to do that. We talked a little bit about recruiting investigators. Then we talk about managing investigators and sites. And then I'm also going to just kind of look down a little bit further and talk about managing payments. So if you think about all the activities that you have with an investigator, with a site, each of those activities, you'll want to be able to go back and see when we had certain things occur, when were certain procedures carried out, what can I do to go ahead and make sure that I'm going to be paying properly the investigators. The CTMS, through managing these relationships, help you keep track of all of this. So those are examples of some of the things that we tend to focus on. And then even, just going over to this side, focusing on managing and tracking clinical trial documents. At first blush, tracking the clinical documents may not seem to be the most exciting thing in the world, but when you kind of step back and think about it, particularly around startup and site close down, the tracking of the clinical documents is of paramount importance, because at the end of the day, particularly around those two time frames, any difficulties you have tracking those documents is going to correlate to additional time spent in the trial. And frankly, as we all know, when it comes to the trial, time is money. So if I can gain some efficiency and avoid delays, this is a nice, easy way to do that. Those are some of the technologies, or rather some of the processes, that are facilitated and supported by Siebel Clinical CTMS. Often, just as a side note here, often what I'll do is I'll pause and say, all right, look at those processes. From your perspective, are we missing any particular processes that should be enabled as part of the CTMS? Gives them a moment to look at it, gives them a moment to digest it, and typically the answer is no. So we talked a little bit about some of the processes that were enabled as part of the CTMS. One of the things that we didn't really discuss so much is the fact that the application is role-based. So whether I happen to be a CRA, whether I happen to be a study manager, for example, the application is going to be presented to me in such a way that I am seeing what I need to see. So let's talk about that in a moment. My screen is configured in such a way to help facilitate my process as a CRA, which is distinct from that of a study manager. The basic look and feel is going to be similar, but it's going to be a little different from one role to the next. And of course, when we talk about those roles aren't existing in isolation. They really are going to be working together. There's one process for a CRA is going to be flowing into the process of that of a study manager. Think about, for example, having a site visit report approved. So you need an approver, for example, you may need a reviewer, and those workflows are and can be enabled inside the application. Another thing to keep in mind here when we talk about the application being role-based is the fact that not only is what I see or how the screen is configured based upon my role, but the data that I see is based upon my rights of access. So if I'm on a given study team, I get to see that information tied to that team. If I don't work with a given site, then that site can be hidden from me. This way I only see that data that's relevant to me, relevant for me to do my job. Now, inasmuch as we have a lot of different processes that are enabled by the CTMS, or by Siebel CTMS, we know that the application is not, frankly, the end-all and be-all. It has to fit inside of your ecosystem. So you look at some of these systems that we tend to talk with. So we didn't talk about integration and talking to other systems quite so much yet, but that's something that's part and parcel of the Siebel CTMS. So for example, we talk about your financial systems. Chatted a little about payments before, but you've got a financial system with an accounts payable. What you want to be able to do is bundle up all those line items from a payment perspective, send that out to your accounts payable system, have that information, have somebody cut the check out to the investigator, and have that data fed back into the CTMS so that you're closing the loop on this. This helps you with the managing of the relationship, but it also keeps you better able to track things from a project management perspective. So I can see not only that a given procedure was done, a CBC, a diff, or whatever the case may be, but I can see that this was bundled up into this payment to the investigator on this date and was paid with this check number. So this is when we're talking about integrating and talking to other systems. So whether we're talking about integrating with your ERP systems, or if you have an electronic informed consent that's going to feed into the CTMS or vice versa. Or, we talked a little bit around integration with EDC, particularly from a subject perspective. Another thing to keep in mind, increasingly what we're seeing is a reliance upon CROs. Now, whether you're using CROs for 10% of your studies or 90% or 100%, there's going to be a need to keep track of that information. Now, some organizations have kind of offloaded a lot of that work and said, you know what, the CRO can handle it. But then they've come to realize that ultimate accountability lies with the sponsor in this particular case. So they want to have that information. So some organizations, what they're doing is that, you know what, see, the CRO is handling a lot of the day-to-day work, but that information is being fed back into the CTMS so that the sponsor organization can have that detail at hand. The last of the systems I'll mention here, and these aren't necessarily exhaustive, but just giving you representative examples, is the increased focus on integration with a trial manager system, like TMF, a trial manager file, or I'm sorry, a trial master file, or a content management system, or a document management system. In CTMS, we can store documents, so we do document storage. We can track information about documents, so we have that capability. But when we start transitioning into a full workflow around document management and electronic trial master file, that's not necessarily something that we do out of the box. So most often what we'll do is we will integrate with other systems, and whether that's a Documentum, a FileNet, or offerings through Oracle, we allow for that integration. When we look at all of this, it really begins to kind of transform that CTMS from just being a clinical trial management system to be more of a collaborative trial management system. So we want to make sure that we can collaborate with other systems. And that's through a variety of different ways of talking to those systems, or even, frankly, sometimes even embedding their screens into our screen, so it makes it a little bit more of a one-stop shop. One of the things I like to do while we're talking about CTMS is do a little bit of a level setting. And one of the ways we do that is talking about that clinical trial hierarchy. So when we go to the application, one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to go through a hierarchy and showing you how at each level of detail you have information that's presented to you. And you can obviously enter information at each level of detail. So as an example here, we talk about program. And often that's going to be associated with a therapeutic area, say anemia. And from there, I can have one or more protocols associated. And we'll use the word protocol. You could use trial, whichever way you like it. The next level down, if I'm conducting my trial, my protocol over multiple regions, or multiple locations, will be region. Often, if not typically, region will be country. It is an optional level, so if I'm just conducting trials here in the United States, then maybe I'm not going to leverage region. If I'm doing something in the US and in Spain and in Brazil and in India and China, then I might be leveraging region as an example. But once again, that's an optional level available to you. Next level down is where we get to the site. And then, of course, within there, an associated investigator and multiple subjects potentially. So that's the basic hierarchy. Just as a side note, usually when I go through this particular hierarchy, I go through it at the same pace that we just heard. And we usually, if we were in the same room, there's head nodding. It's not rocket science. Everybody's looking at this pretty much the same way. But it's also a matter of level setting and also making sure that just that we're all on the same page. This slide is around data visibility. We chatted a little bit around the application being role-based and an aspect of the security so that I only see data to which I have access to or access rights to. Now, I don't typically use this slide, but just so you know, this is something that's kind of built into the Siebel application. So access control up top is determined a few different ways. On the left, you'll see the views. So what I see on the screen is determined by my responsibility. On the right, the application data or the records themselves, our visibility to those is determined a couple different ways. And this outlines that. So there can be master data that's included. For example, products, literature, which we don't tend to talk about too much, but that's master data level. And then we get down to the program level. It's determined by, say, ownership. So if I create a record, for example, if I create a site, until I provided access to someone else, I'm the only one who has visibility to that site. Now, if I provide someone access to it by making them part of that team, then they have visibility to it. So that's how you begin to provide access, provide visibility to certain aspects of data. Sometimes you'll hear us talk about organizations as well. Generally speaking, the Siebel application is designed so that you can have multiple organizations and separate visibility by data. And you do that by organization. The CTMS application is not entirely what we call multi-org enabled, but with a little bit of work, a little bit of configuration, could be. So what does that mean? Well, if I'm a CRO and I wanted to run a CTMS for sponsor A, sponsor B, sponsor C, with a little bit of work, I could have sponsor A as one organization, sponsor B as another organization, and sponsor C as a third organization, and they could be all in one instance, but still provide that visibility and that segmentation by organization. So just as a reminder, you probably won't be showing this slide, but I already had it in there, so I thought I'd go ahead and leave it. Now that we've talked about some of the high-level processes that are enabled for the CTMS, let's go into a little bit of the detail, a little bit of the ABCs around Siebel Clinical and kind of where it comes from. One of the first things that we'll draw out and mention to you is the fact that Siebel Clinical has a disconnected offering. So it is both an on-premise application that I can go into, or if I happen to be on the road, I can fire it up on my laptop, and it looks exactly the same. For a number of years, this was a competitive differentiator because some organizations, I think Impact as an example, they had only their online client, but they didn't have an offline, and they kept promising it for years and years and years, and they had not delivered. So this became quite a selling point. As a side note, there are, I think, 7 patents associated with the synchronization technology, because if you have that offline client, you're going to have a small install on your laptop, a small encrypted database, and the process of synchronization between the master database and the, if you will, the slave database, that's going to be controlled through a fairly rigorous process. And that is, as I mentioned, there are 7 patents associated with it. Now, having said that, all of that, most recently we've rolled out mobile CRA. In some circumstances, the remote client associated with Siebel Clinical would be more applicable. In others, mobile CRA would be more applicable. Our lead-in these days is with mobile CRA. So when we talk about the mobile access, we lead in with that. And we have this in the background so we know it, and we can talk about it. And we can get into the distinction with mobile CRA versus this another time. Something that also comes up is around the idea of being able to deploy the Siebel CTMS application across multiple languages. And there are additional slides that talk about all the languages that are available. But this is an example of how this is done. This is the base CTMS screen shown in Japanese. So I think it's been deployed in 20+ applications. And by that, it means that if you have a CTMS install, you can start this thing up and you will have it in Japanese, in Brazilian Portuguese, in Spanish, in simplified Chinese, Italian, and a number of other languages. This is not custom work. This doesn't require additional code. This is already done. Assuming, for the sake of argument, that additional changes need to be made, there are facilities inside of this application, or moreover, the Siebel application, to allow for this kind of a change. So here's an indication of, I think, actually a subset of the languages that are available. one thing to be mindful of, not something you necessarily need to remember, but during the course of the install, the database has to be set so that it is what we call Unicode compliant, so that it can accommodate the various languages. There are other levels of accommodation for non-US, non-English standards, so it allows for that globalization, global data. You can enter data in whichever language. We talked about multi-org a little while ago. There's a capability, the information is stored in the universal time code so that it's stored in, you can see it in whatever time you happen to need to see the data in, but it's actually stored in, if you will, that server time. It's a little, a little complicated. You don't have to go into that level of detail. But just netting it out that you have the capability for the globalization and then the locale support as well. Just as a side note here, we alluded to the fact that we could do the studies in multiple regions, and also often they're represented in multiple countries. Talked about the fact that we have the multiple languages as well. We can accommodate multiple currencies and maintain those exchange rates inside the system. The reason that's important is I could have a site in, let's just say in Germany, and I could have a site in the US, I can have a site in Japan, and I'm going to have 3 different currencies that are going to be manifest at the site level. I can go ahead and leverage the multi-currency capability, so as we roll up and look at this at the protocol and program level, it'll roll up so that I can see this at a common currency. Something else that we alluded to a little while ago was the fact that Siebel, the CTMS, has some good flexibility. So one of the things that we're looking at here, up the top is your standard CTMS or standard Siebel screen. Down below is Microsoft Project directly embedded inside of the Siebel application. So this is leveraging Siebel to some degree as a portal. This is important in a few different ways. One way that this is important is Siebel CTMS has a little bit of project management, and I say this in air quotes that you can't see, capability, but people really want to look at information in it from a Gantt chart perspective. If they're going to do project management, they're probably going to be using Microsoft Project. The good news for us is that we have existing integration with Microsoft Project, and this is done by our OCS team. And they've integrated with Microsoft Project Exchange, so they've done this at a server level. But once again, the important part is, right in the context of my projects and the context of my protocol, I get to see the project-related information directly embedded there. Another type of leveraging CTMS's or Siebel's integration functionality is bringing directly the Microsoft Outlook calendar into the Siebel application. So that's something that is there and available as well as a possibility. And the last of these that I'll mention goes back to the conversation we were having around TMS or eTMS or document management. So as we talked about, CTMS has some document tracking capabilities, and I can store documents as attachments. But that's kind of the end-all and be-all. I could add some additional workflow if need be around certain aspects of documents, but it's not a formal document management system. What some of our customers have done is they've directly embedded document management applications in the context of Siebel CTMS, so that I can look at my protocol and then look at all of the related documents down below and do all of the document management or eTMF type activities directly in line with the application that's going to be controlling it. So, and I don't have to leave one application to go to another. Now let's get to the conversation around reporting. So it's one thing to be able to put a lot of information into the system, but additional value comes, and frankly a lot of the value comes from information out of the system. And this is something that's going to be huge, not just for the trial managers, frankly, but for other individuals within who are going to be leveraging the application, CRAs as a prime example. So here's a few different ways we talk about getting information out of the system or reporting. One of the first options is leveraging the correspondence module. So I can be inside of the CTMS, be looking at information tied to a given investigator, or a series of investigators, let's say, and if I want to send a solicitation note out to the investigator candidates for a trial, I can send them out on paper through using correspondence, and it'll use an existing template and do a Microsoft Word merge to bring the data in from Siebel CTMS into Word. From there, that gets pushed out to a fulfillment center or just printed out and then delivered out, in a manual basis. Another way to do this is using email. Same kind of thing, where I can use, kind of collect the series of investigators I want to reach out to, use an existing template, and send out an email blast, assuming that I have the CTMS tied to my email, Microsoft Outlook or Lotus Notes as an example. Another area that we focus on in terms of possible reporting is BI Publisher. So we talk about reporting in a couple different ways, really. BI Publisher versus CDA, which is leveraging OBIE. And yes, BI Publisher is a component of OBIE. Let's talk about the distinction. BI Publisher is leveraged for highly formatted reporting, and it's for static reporting. So an example of this is the site visit report. We can do very distinct formatting, we can add watermarks, we can do a lot of things with that, but this is something that requires IT intervention. The tagline for BI Publisher has always been pixel perfect reporting. So if I need a highly formatted report that is configured using Word templates or Excel or something like that, but still does require IT integration, that's where BI Publisher comes into play. CDA, on the other hand, leverages OBIE. So that's where we have all our role-based dashboards. We have 150 plus reports, and it provides ad hoc capability. So you have increased flexibility and increased just general speed to access. So you're going to have much more delivered. As a side note, when we talk about the pre-delivered reports with CTMS, there are very few, to be perfectly candid. That's one of the reasons that CDA is such a value as well. So one of the other things that we frankly even often forget about is the idea of the quick print. So here's a list of contacts. We didn't even talk about this yet in the context of the reporting, but just as an FYI here, if I need a quick list of all of my investigators, I can bring them up in the list applet here and do a quick print, which is clicking on one of the icons up around the menu area and print that out for somebody running down the hall. It's not formatted, but it's just down and dirty information. We talked about the trip report, which provides much more formatting. So this is that example of that clinical trip report. Now, as a side note, this is the default trip report that comes with the application. No one ever leverages this out of the box. Everyone always wants more detail. They want it configured differently. They want different logos, etc. And that's standard. It's part of the process. So just be mindful of that. So you see, of course, in this trip report, leveraging BI Publisher, it's brought in the detail automatically around the protocol, protocol title, program, site, investigator, all that other information. It's filled in the expected attendees, and then you have your checklist, as well as follow-up items from that given report. We won't spend too much time going into CDA, but just to give you a quick overview as to what's delivered here and what the conversation tends to be. We're talking about those reporting options, so we talked about a few others, so we'll spend a few minutes going into CDA and just giving a little bit of background. The main focus on this particular site is the fact that CTMS is focused on operational performance management, and it's designed to provide that at a variety of different levels. So whether we're talking about this from looking at this from a site perspective, if I'm a CRA, if I'm a head of clinical operations, whatever level I need to see certain levels of detail, I have some visibility. Now, as we chatted about before, CDA is provided with 9 different role-based dashboards. So you have a CRA, you have a study manager, you have a region manager, you have an executive as an example. So you have visibility from a variety of different perspectives. But just going back to the main point that this is around operational performance management. You're not going to get at certain levels of subject data. You're not looking at, I mean, you have some basic information on queries as an example. But once again, even the data management level is operational in nature. You're not looking at the number of green-eyed, left-handed, red-headed people. You're just not looking at level of detail. So we chatted a little bit about the fact that CDA is providing those role-based dashboards. And then, of course, at the core of this is an analysis engine. I tend to focus on this a little bit by talking about the fact that organizations are typically familiar with a Cognos or a business objects. So the analysis engine at the core of CDA is the Oracle Business Intelligence Enterprise Edition, or OBIEE, analytics engine. So that analytics engine and that application competes head-to-head with those other products and does so fairly successfully. And the last piece with CDA is fairly important, is the fact that we've gone ahead and sourced content from a couple of sources. So in this case, we source from Oracle Clinical Remote Data Capture, OCRDC, and Siebel Clinical. So that's number one. So we've already done that. Number two, the next thing that we're doing is we are integrating with Inform, and we expect that out we're now in July of 2013, so we're expecting those releases coming out in the next few months to integrate with Inform and bring that data in. You also see the fact that allows for third-party data sources as well, and talk about a little bit of that data flow. So as we mentioned, we have Oracle Clinical Remote Data Capture and Siebel Clinical as existing data sources, and we're bringing in Inform soon. We also, well, what I will kind of pause and mention that one of our customers, frankly, has already brought in third-party data. In this case, we're going to call Inform third-party data. And they knew we were productizing it, but they figured, let's go ahead and get that done sooner rather than later. So as a proof point, one of our customers has already leveraged this exact architecture to bring in data not only from Oracle Clinical Remote Data Capture, Siebel Clinical, but to actually bring in additional detail from another source that we hadn't yet leveraged. And also noting that as part of the initial plan, we wanted to make sure that we were going to be able to bring data in from third-party data sources. When we talk about this slide, we talk about it just mentioning the sources and how we bring the data in. But we also talk about the fact we've done a lot of work that an organization might wish to do. So one thing that comes up from time to time, if you've got a reporting person in there, you've got a data warehouse person, they may start thinking, okay, 150 reports, and they brought data in from Siebel Clinical and OCRDC. Yeah, I could probably do that myself. And the answer to that is absolutely yes. An organization, they can build this out from scratch. But then the question becomes, why would you want to? Why would you want to invest all of that time, all of those person hours, all those person years, frankly, to figure out all the detail that's going to be required for the operational reporting from an Oracle Clinical Remote Data Capture perspective and Siebel Clinical? Not only figure out all the individual fields, but do the mapping. Here we have this SDE ETL. That's a source-dependent extract. And then we have extract, transform, and load. Figure all of that. Create the staging tables. Then maybe create another set of ETLs so that we can create our data warehouse. And then on top of that, build out the reports. Why not leverage something that's already pre-built so that you're getting a faster time to value, that you're getting improved return on investment? So that's the basic flow here. Something else I'll mention here on the right side, we get into the presentation side of this. And the OBIE interactive dashboards, so that's the area we tend to focus on quite a bit. So that's the those 9 dashboards that are presented out and made available to everyone that are role-based. But also important here is the ad hoc analysis. It's one thing to have pre-created reports, but frankly, all of those reports can be, and we expect them to be, altered, changed, configured, copied based upon the individual organization's requirements. But also, you want to have that capability to do your own ad hoc analysis. So if I'm a clinician who needs access to information, I don't want to necessarily have to go out and reach out to IT to have them do all of that work and then bring it back to me. Because that whole process, that's an iterative process that can take weeks to actually occur. You think about the fact that someone comes up with an idea, says, I need to go ahead and get this report. Then from there, they go through the process and tells them what they need for the report. And then someone gives them back what they think they said during the course of the analysis process. And they go, oh no, that's what I said, but I really need this. Think about the iterative nature of that and how many weeks it's required. Then also, frankly, think about the fact that most IT organizations are already backlogged. Wouldn't it be nicer, wouldn't it be easier if you could say, all right, for some of the select individuals who need to do the ad hoc analysis, here's a tool. We've already brought the information in, and you can build it your own reports. And you know what? You can go ahead and ship those reports out as much as you like. We also, just moving down a little bit, have MS Office integration. So you can, for example, get a PowerPoint presentation, set that up with a template of 5, 6, 10, however many reports that you need to have someone have visibility to, and give this to them. They go in and press a button to refresh the data, and then that data is refreshed for them. It reaches out, pulls the most current data. They don't actually have to go through that process of calling you, getting you to collate the information. It's all there for them. I mean, just think about all of that process that one has to go through now to do these periodic presentations. And then other thing to mention here, if I need to have those reports on the run, I have iPhone and iPad integration. So I have yes, there's an app for that. I can bring this stuff up in a really nice user interface on my iPad, so I have visibility to that wherever I happen to be. And the last thing I mentioned is right there in the center. It gets into the idea of proactive alerts. So it's one thing to have reports that are maybe run on a periodic basis. It's another thing to have an interactive dashboard that I go out to and gain information, and that's pretty good in and of itself. It's another thing, frankly, to have those reports, to have that information kind of reach out for me and kind of tap me on the shoulder and say, hey, we've reached a milestone, or we've got a problem with enrollment over here. And this is getting to the idea of the proactive alerts, so that I can react in a much more timely fashion and get the information in a much more timely fashion than I might have otherwise. The last thing I will mention down here on this slide is the whole idea of multi-source integration. This is an optional component with CDA, and this is really capitalizing on the fact that we brought in some technology through Sun Microsystems acquisition, and it actually brought in some good data matching capabilities and a little bit of data stewardship. So organizations that have a master data management initiative in place, they'll want to use their own master data management processes. Having said that, I have yet to show up to one of those accounts that has a formal master data management initiative where they've cleansed all the products and have all of the customers or all of the subjects, and it's going through this whole process. But if you think about what's going to happen when I have multiple data sources, so let's say I'm working in a heterogeneous environment in which there's Oracle Clinical, OCRDC, Inform, and Siebel Clinical. Well, that same investigator can be set up in all three systems. That same investigator can be set up, or the same site can be set up in all three systems. Products across all three systems, and a series of other objects. If you don't properly account for that, you're going to have a redundancy of data when you go to do the reporting. That's the idea behind this blue box, is to help eliminate and reduce the potentiality of that redundancy. So we do there's a bit of rules that are incorporated, there's a bit of matching that happens, some level of master data management and creating a master index to make sure that John Jones as a given investigator is the same John Jones potentially across all three systems, so that I'm not duplicating data and that I'm providing the most reliable data possible. Now this particular slide is a little bit of an older slide. As I mentioned, there are 9 dashboards, but here's an example of the older slide that has the 6 dashboards. We've included 3 more most recently, and we'll provide you with that slide. But this is really providing us with the fact that we've created over 100 pre-built reports that are ready out of the box and spread over various dashboards for people to leverage. And once again, if you needed to use all of those dashboards, great. If you only needed to use select ones, that's fine. And once again, you can copy the individual dashboards and reports for particular use. Here's a quick glimpse of at the time where we stood from a data management ClinOps perspective and leveraging those as well as the metrics. These numbers have since changed. And here's a quick glimpse of a sample dashboard that's represented in OBIE. Now, this is a CDA dashboard here. And then, of course, as we were chatting about, that information is available kind of wherever you need to have it. I have a little bit more updated slides on some of this, the last portion of this, but this is just a quick representation of stepping through this slide deck. I'll also make another slide deck available which has some more detail around CDA as well as some other items, mobile CRA and the like, but this is a quick FYI. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now, but you can use this for your information. If you have any questions, let me know.